Our language is so high and holy. What we speak about ourselves is what we are calling in for ourselves. So it first starts with our own inner dialogue, our own inner conversation. We all have this consistent critic all the time in the back, running, running, running. And if you can inspire that voice to be uplifting, to be kind, the body listens. It will manifest whatever you're calling in for yourself.
Hello and welcome back to the Hannah Frankman podcast. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Erin Doppelt. Erin is a meditation teacher and the author of the newly released book, Nothing Can Stop You. And in today's episode, Erin and I talk about the importance of having mindfulness practices as a nervous system re-regulation and why it's so common for people's nervous systems to get dysregulated in the modern world, and why children are naturally good at self-soothing and re-regulating, and how to encourage them and support them in their re-regulation practices. We talk about the importance of finding your unique path and passion and purpose in life. And we talk about some of Erin's pieces of advice around how to talk to the people in your life who don't necessarily understand the unconventional path that you're on with the education of your children in ways that perhaps alleviate some of the uncomfortability of those types of conversations. Meditation has been very important to me in my journey. I've been practicing meditation for years, and it's been immensely beneficial for me. And so I'm so excited to bring somebody on the show who has that area of expertise to talk about her journey, her path, some of the most important things that she teaches that hopefully will carry something that is also helpful for you. I hope that you enjoy today's episode. Erin,
Hi.
welcome to the podcast.
I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. We talked about doing this. Was it 2 months ago? Longer than that? I can't remember. I re-met you at a birthday party.
I love birthday parties in Austin because it's actually really like a networking event. It's like the kids brought us together, but we're all here to just see who's here and connect.
Yeah, I feel like I've met some really, really stellar humans at birthday parties,
Me too.
including you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the idea to do this came up very quickly, and I'm very excited that we're here. I am so excited to have a meditation teacher on the podcast. I've spent so much time over the past few months talking to people who are building schools and educating kids in unusual ways because that's so much of the work that I do. But there are so many other things that I want to talk about that are equally related, and meditation has been so important to me on my journey. And there are so many things that I want to go deep on with you today. So we will see how much time that we have. Can you very quickly set the stage for anyone who's not familiar with you? Just like in a minute or two, just elevator pitch who you are and what you do.
Yeah. I want to hear about your meditation practice. I'm Erin. I'm a spiritual psychology and meditation teacher. The brand story goes that I spent my 20s living in Israel, India, across Asia and Europe. And I have my master's in clinical psychology and education from Columbia University. And I have a very nomadic lifestyle. My husband and 6-month-old baby are settled here in Austin right now. And we just decided to pack everything up in a couple weeks and get back on the road and start traveling again. And everything I share with the world is this integration of Eastern ritual and Western psychology. And I think the reason that it resonates so deeply with my audience or people in general is because I can go woo-woo with you. Like I'll go as deep as you want into the spiritual world. I love the spiritual world. Like I can meet you as woo in the galaxy as you want to go. And also I have this very clinical background, and I studied with the greatest educators in positive psychology and emotional intelligence. I've done high-level research for Ivy League institutions. Like I can really dive into the logical side of the brain as well, the analytical. And therein lies the medicine. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. And I trust my community, my students, my listeners to decide for themselves, to really trust themselves on this journey, to know what resonates and to leave what doesn't.
That's beautiful. And I think having that sort of dual grounding, one makes it easier for both parts of people's minds to trust you. But it translates a lot of the more esoteric or intangible parts of what meditation is, what having rituals and practices are, into language that we're just more familiar with, which makes it a little bit easier to understand, which I know is a very big part of the work that you do, is making things that might feel very abstract and very removed from day-to-day life or the understandings that we have about how the world works, taking things that might feel very hard to tangibly understand and making them, like, translating them to a language that feels much more accessible. Can you, I know this is such a basic question, but I also think we're going to go layers and layers deeper on this question over the next hour or so. What is meditation? What is a practice?
Yeah. And there's 8 billion people in this world. There's 8 billion different ways to eat for optimum health. There's 8 billion different ways to connect to a loved one. And I firmly believe there's 8 billion different ways to have a life-altering, devoted meditation practice. So meditation can be defined in many different ways. A lot of people talk about mindfulness, which truly is a Buddhist practice, and it translates into awareness. And then there's so many different ways to discover thyself and immerse yourself in these different practices. I teach a very specific lineage of meditation. I call it up-level meditation. It's an active meditation. It's geared for people with ADD, ADHD, anxiety, depression, compulsive, sometimes negative thought patterns. It's movement, it's active. And that is what I have learned has been so beneficial for my community. Meditation can be seen as sitting down and pausing. And maybe it's a silent seated practice where you're connecting to your breath. That silent seated practice of connecting to your breath is one of 8 billion different ways to meditate. So I heavily encourage people to do what feels lightest for them. That might be when you wake up in the morning, when your alarm goes off, laying down on your back and practicing lower belly breathing. Call that meditation and move on, divine. It might be when you're running errands, maybe you're having a chaotic day. The kids are late to school. You have an angry email from your boss. You just realized you haven't eaten yet today and it's 3 p.m. On your next walk to point A to point B, maybe you practice a walking meditation, box breathing. Inhale for 4 steps, hold for 4 steps, exhale for 4 steps, hold the exhale. Meditation is an invitation to give yourself time to relax the nervous system. And I'm so excited to talk about what this can look like in the school system, because we really need tools. And we need to learn from a young age how to self-soothe. So many of us have really unhealthy self-soothing practices that we've normalized. We learn from our parents, we learn from our teachers. And kids actually have incredible innate ability to self-soothe, and then we manipulate it over time. So meditation is, I think of it, an invitation to pause, connect to a deeper version of thyself, relax thy nervous system, and give yourself an invitation to shift into a healthier headspace, whatever that looks like for you. And that usually means breath work.
Can you talk a little bit about some of these unhealthy self-soothing practices that you just referenced?
Absolutely. I mean, just I think of like the people in our lives. We scroll on social media, we have sex, we gamble, we smoke something, we take a drug, we binge watch Netflix. We eat shit food. There are so many things we do to self-soothe, and we learn this from our community. And it's so true. You're the sum of the people you spend most of your time with. How can we shift? So let's talk about children and how they self-soothe. I have a 6-month-old baby, and when she's upset, which is very rare, she doesn't really know. We don't even really let her cry at this point. We're always there for her. However, she'll hum to herself if she needs to self-soothe. She'll suck her hands if she needs to self-soothe. We come into this world with an oral fixation. So right when you're birthed into this world, you look for your mother's nipple. And we've adopted this over time to self-soothe by always having something in our mouth. So we smoke cigarettes, we chew gum, we eat something, we drink pop and then coffee and then water and then juice and then a smoothie. We kiss people, right? We like to kiss on the cheek, kiss on the mouth, like we chew on a toothpick. We have an oral fixation as a route of self-soothing. And there's so many other healthy ways to connect to self-soothing practices. Once we learn how to self-soothe as adults, and a lot of us will do this with TV, a lot of us will do this scrolling on our phone, a lot of us will do this with our 5 p.m. glass of wine, we end up staying in that cycle because they're really addictive patterns. Junk food is addictive. Alcohol, it's habit forming. Children love nature. Children are innately spiritual. And I think The Spiritual Child, which I talk about, The Spiritual Child is a book written by Dr. Lisa Miller. It's fantastic. But so many children come into this world innately spiritual. The ability to connect to animals, to connect to adults, grandparents, like people way older than them. The ability to almost maybe see and hear things that might not quite be there. But the depth the child can have is something that we definitely need to nurture over time, because those practices of getting into nature, going for a walk, getting quiet, having a tantrum, that's also a practice where you're expressing yourself, really allowing authentic emotion to come through as well. These are all practices that we've almost like numbed out a little bit as adults. And we really want to nurture this for our children, and especially in the school system as well.
Where do you see the lines between a very healthy expression of something like a tantrum, where the child is learning how to feel and release their emotions instead of bottling them in, which many of us learn how to do over the course of our lives? It's not, there's going to be a negative reaction if we let out too much emotion. Someone's going to judge us. It's not cool. We learn how to bottle it in. How much of it that is healthy versus maybe an indicator that something isn't aligned for a child? Like, where do you think about the lines between healthy and unhealthy expression of some of these self-soothing things in children? And then how do you think about maybe the evolution of that as the child moves towards adulthood, and some of the things that are appropriate for self-soothing when you're 2 aren't necessarily appropriate developmentally when you're 16 or 27?
Healthy is the key word here, because it's really, what have we normalized in our culture? Children cannot communicate. All they know how to do is cry. And same with toddlers. It's so sensory overload every single day. Going to the grocery store, meeting new people. Maybe your parent says to you, go say hi to so-and-so, or say please and thank you to so-and-so. This is so overstimulating. Like, think about, I get overstimulated really easily. Like, as adults, we get overstimulated all the time. So a child's only coping pattern or habit is the ability to cry, scream, throw a tantrum. And it's actually one way of integration. With that said, there are so many, like, I'll just speak. I think my own life experience is just the most topical of all. My daughter's 6 months old. Her name is Eden. And we've swaddle her. So swaddle is when you put a baby like really tightly in a blanket. And it's encouraged until it's not, when they start rolling. Because when they start rolling, you need to make sure their arms are out and they're in something called a sleep sack so they can easily turn over. I had no idea, like so many other things in motherhood, that the transition from swaddle to sleep sack is traumatizing. Like, going from having good long stretches of sleep to waking up every 45 minutes. And I keep saying to myself and to my friends, why did nobody tell me this? Like, how is it, like, most people, like, we all came from a mother. Swaddling is one of the most common practices, and it's actually an Eastern practice that made its way into Western. how did I not know this? And it's because so many people educate, so many parents will do sleep training during this time. And absolutely no judgment to anyone that sleep trains their baby. I think it's a combination of allowing your baby. There's so many different ways to do it, but typically there's crying involved, letting your child cry. And the reason I didn't know about this transition from swaddle to sleep sack is because so many parents will sleep train their baby during that time that the focus isn't really about that transition. It's about teaching the baby to self-soothe on their own time, which could mean leaving the baby in the crib to cry for extended periods of time. And again, like I really understand parents that do that because you need to sleep and it typically leads to more sleep for the parents. And we don't really know the long-term positives or negatives for this conversation. The reason I bring that up is because there's so many things in our culture that we've normalized that maybe aren't even the healthiest practices. So a story that I love to share. I'm from Chicago and I went to summer camp. And this camp, I was wild, like every normal young girl. I was probably in third or fourth grade at this time. And the counselor kept yelling at me to behave, but I wanted to laugh. I wanted to dance. I wanted to tell jokes. I was like running around and like pulling on my friends' shirts to get their attention to play with me. And my counselor said, "You're in so much trouble. Like go to the corner, sit down and like think about what you're doing. And when your mom gets here to pick you up, I'm going to tell her how poorly you misbehave." And I'm so nervous. I'm so nervous to disappoint my mom. My mom pulls up. I walk over with my counselor, and my counselor says to my mom, "Erin really misbehaved today. She was running around. She was acting really wild." And my mom turns to my counselor and says, "It's camp. If she can't be like this at camp, where is she going to exert her energy?" And my mom stuck up for me in that moment. And that's when I realized, probably one of the biggest takeaways of all, that not authority or adults are right all the time. And also my mom has my back. But it's these wild institutions. Like this is summer camp. Like children should be allowed to be like their fullest expression of self at all times.
There's so much in the trajectory of going from a small child to adulthood that numbs you to your own instincts, because in order to do well, to succeed inside of the system, you have to play by the rules of the system, which don't care at all about what's natural for you or even what you want to a large extent. It's like, well, I don't feel energized if I have to go sit down immediately after lunch, or I don't focus as well if I don't get a midday nap, or I learn better when I have long breaks to physically move, or I function better if I can go to sleep later at night and sleep in later in the morning because my natural circadian rhythm doesn't map onto the normal school schedule. You don't have room to express those things, but you don't even really have room to think about it. Like no one's asking you, well, how do you optimize your day? Like what feels best to you? And so kids aren't even allowed to think about their own natural energy rhythms, let alone things that they're interested in spending time doing, let alone things that bring them passion and joy and that they're innately curious about. What are some of the biggest things that you see that get slowly squashed in people in their journey from childhood to adulthood?
Perfectionism and procrastination. Perfectionism and procrastination are the two biggest obstacles that have prevented the greatest healers, the Messiah, geniuses of our lifetime, prevented them from showing up. And thank you so much for asking that. There's so many different ways that I want to answer this question, because first it's squashing creativity. And there's so many different ways to harness this in the school system. There's already schools that are bringing in twice daily meditation, which is like, they call it quiet time. That is so transformational. Quiet time to sit down and be with your thoughts. Divine. Nurturing a spiritual child, asking kids what they feel and think about the world around them, asking them about their dreams. Did you, like, starting the day at school or whatever educational group that the child is showing up to, did you have any dreams the night before? How did the dreams make you feel? Do you want to paint your dreams? Do you want to write them down? little things like this is Jungian psychology. It's not a small school of psychology. It's understanding the psyche, the inner workings of a child, how their subconscious mind is working, how they're processing their daytime. So always asking a child about their dreams is going to be immensely beneficial. But getting back to procrastination and perfectionism, we learn at a very, very young age how to be perfect. And it's the thing that's going to kill creativity the most. So perfectionism, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It's not a real thing to ever be. And it happens really organically over time when a teacher or a parent says, good job for something, or I'm so proud of you for something. Words of affirmation are so important for all people, especially young people. But there's a way to do it where words of praises end up, we don't want to be so sparingly with them. It's like, for example, if a child runs 50 meters really fast and you're like, oh my God, good job. You ran that so fast. That child's going to feel not great if they run that same distance slower or they get beat in their next race. So little things like this end up teaching gentle traits of perfectionism. I wrote about this in It's All chapter 7 in my book. And there's a really fascinating study about perfectionism that you have the opportunity there's one study where you have the opportunity to make one piece of art really, really perfect, or make as many pieces as art as you can. So the quality versus the quantity. And the group of people that made the most art over time ended up harnessing better skills, fine-tuning their craft, noticing what works and what doesn't. And the group that focused on one perfect piece of art, they ended up not even having the most substantial, creative, beautiful thing either. And the same thing is true for procrastination. Procrastination typically exists in the future. It's this ideal feeling state of ready, and ready is kind of the biggest lie ever. The idea to overcome procrastination is to start now, is to start today, whatever the dream is. If the dream is to be with your highest beloved, to write a book, to travel the world, to quit your job, to start a podcast, to start a garden, like whatever it is, the enemy of procrastination is immediate action. So taking action right now in real time. Procrastination is one way we protect ourselves from feeling what we would perceive as negative feeling states of doing the thing. So if you need to write a paper for school and you keep procrastinating, you push it off and you push it off and you push it off, it's because you're pushing off the negative feeling state that's paired with writing the paper. So procrastination and perfectionism is something that we really want to encourage our young people to overcome at a very young age. And the way to overcome procrastination is these daily rituals, is these daily habits of action. Those are two kind of big points.
There's so much here that I want to dig into, but I want to talk about, I actually want to translate this or overlay this on my experience for a minute, because I grew up almost completely outside of the system. I was homeschooled all the way through. I was raised by two parents who in many ways were particularly mindful and were, like I grew up around things like Napoleon Hill and Maxwell Maltz. Like my dad, one of the best things I think he ever did for my education is that, like, I actually think this was like the most important thing of my entire 12-year homeschooling journey is I used to sing in choirs, and I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. So it was like, 45-minute drive each way to get to my choir rehearsal. And my dad would drive me every week, and he got these audio books of Think and Grow Rich and Psycho-Cybernetics. And we listened to a lecture series on NLP. And I'm 12 years old, just absorbing all of this and learning how to have positive self-talk and how to think really in a very positive way about the world, but also myself. So I was, in a lot of ways, I think in an abnormally well-attuned environment for me to develop healthier habits around some of these things. And yet I've still noticed the cultural milieu is so strong that even growing up very much outside of the system and a lot of the pressures of the system, my parents never cared if I got into a good college or not. Like they couldn't care less. But I knew that society cared. And that was still like a tough thing to separate myself from. But I've also noticed throughout really like my late teens all the way through my 20s now, there's sort of this divide between things that I really care about and feel an attachment to doing well, versus things that I'm just doing for fun and I don't really have an attachment to how well they turn out. And these, procrastination and perfectionism tendencies that you're talking about crop up in the first category of things where, like, for some reason I've attached that it matters whether or not I do a good job. And oftentimes I do better with the things I don't care about quite as much. Like if I'm just like throwing away some tweet where I just am thinking about this thing and I have really strong feelings about it. And so I'm going to go, type it out and post it, and it goes viral. And I'm just like, that's like fun, whatever. Like I didn't care if it went viral or if it got 5 likes. Like it didn't matter to me. Whereas I procrastinated heavily on projects that I know that like I feel really matter in my own sense of the work that I want to do, or the things that I have a sense that I can be helpful doing, or that I have some egoic attachment to, my sense of worth is connected to how well I do here. I'm going to be measured by this in some abstract and arbitrary way. And so even if you're not inside of all of the systemic structures that are teaching you these things, they're so entrenched on a cultural level that it's still hard to escape them. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
I think it's okay. Yeah. The core of positive psychology. So positive psychology is the science that makes life worth living. This isn't a small conversation piece. And of course, it's so American and it's so Western to like quantify the feeling state of happiness and joy and nourishment. Dr. Martin Seligman of University of Pennsylvania, he came up with the PERMA model. And the A in the PERMA model is achievement. And this means you're working your way up. And it's so easy to understand achievement in school. Get an A. Or at a corporate job, get a promotion, more money, more vacation days that you're not going to take. We understand achievement. In a personal level, this could look like running a 5K, reading a couple more books per year. It can look like a meditation streak. There's so many different ways to achieve, to work your way and accomplish something as well. There's a lot of different things about our modern day world that are out of alignment, but it's almost as if it came into the world from a place of goodness and then it got miscued a little bit. To live our fullest life, we have to be working towards something. And working towards getting into a bougie school, or working towards, I don't know, a designer handbag or a fancy car. That may not resonate with the majority of us, but it is what society told us is the most like important thing, or the thing that we should be wanting to achieve. And we luckily get to redefine that. And I actually think that is the parents' job. That's what we need to learn from our parents. So similar for me, my parents they wanted me, I grew up going to public school. I'm from outside Chicago. It's like one of the very good public school. I went to undergrad in Pittsburgh and I went to grad school in New York. And in between undergrad and grad school, I traveled the world. And my stance on it, and really the thing that I think is so important, is the greatest education you will ever have is booking a plane ticket and going to live on the other side of the world or another city. But connecting to a culture that prays to a different God, that eats different foods during breakfast and lunch, that has different rituals and a cyclical nature, how they connect to nature, like Mother Nature and the divine and each other, you are going to learn so much more. So when I was 23, I moved to Israel and I spent time in like many different places throughout Israel, moshavim and kibbutzim. There's an ashram in the desert where I spent a lot of time. And then I moved to India and I lived in the slums of Mumbai and I educated in the slums of Mumbai. And I lived in many different ashrams and spiritual centers and I spent time in silence. And there's things that I learned during that time that are so life-altering. There's no school system that would ever have been able to support an educational structure like that. So there is a term where you're almost meeting yourself in an educational system where you are having this powerful experience. There's a Hebrew term called the mifgash, the meeting. And in my 20s, I would lead trips throughout Israel with Israelis. And it would be a time to connect to the land with people of the land. So not only are you getting an education of what it means to travel around this really sacred piece of land, but you are learning it through the lens of people of the land. And that type of education is going to really outschool anything because you're in it. You're learning with your hands. You're like eating the experience. This is a very holistic way to educate yourself. And that I think is the most transformational. And when I know I said earlier, we're going to start traveling again. I mean, that's the life that I want for my family as well. This idea that being part of the whole entire globe, part of the world where you can travel around and connect to people in different languages or speak different languages. That's the solution to world peace, being able to have multiple ways to communicate, to understand, to reflect. So that's what I think is like really top of mind for me right now.
When you work with adults, how do you help them unwind the attachment towards success in the eyes of society, even when it is not aligned with the things that feel resonant for them or the things that feel like they fit? How do you help people unpack this deeply ingrained, like, I mean, even evolutionarily ingrained, if the tribe likes me, I'm going to be safe. It will protect me from the wolves. If they like me, they will make sure I have food. I'm never going to starve and be an outcast. It's so deep in the wiring. It's very scary to let go of, even if we would live in a world where it really doesn't matter anymore. How do you help people unpack that?
Well, it's not do they like me? It's am I fertile? Especially when it comes to the village. So the village protects you when you procreate and you're fertile and you're the space to help the village evolve. We interpret that now as, am I being liked? What do people think about me? The greatest mantra of all is what other people think about me is none of my business. It's one that I encourage all people to double their devotion on. It is a life-altering mantra. What other people think about me is none of my business. It is one of the hardest things ever to overcome not being liked. And it's okay. You know, we talk about our ego all the time as this negative thing. The ego reminds us to shower. The ego reminds us to eat. The ego reminds us to keep a secret that like a dear friend told us. So there's always a healthy way to connect to the ego. When I work with my clients, first of all, there's so many different ways to transform. None of it matters if you're not in alignment. So you will go out into the world, you will maybe achieve success, but if you are not in alignment, it's not going to feel the same way to you. So first things first, I always get my clients into alignment. This requires a relaxed nervous system. So we always start with meditation. I have a year-long certification where my clients, my students become certified meditation teachers and spiritual psychology coaches. And we start with the first term, which is an in-depth meditation teacher training. When you have a life-altering meditation practice, when you are taking time to pause and practice breathwork, you're empowered by the practices. You know which practices to move into based on your mood. You become incredibly powerful, almost supernatural. You radiate a different energy. You elevate in a different way. You're going to have different clarity and different thoughts. And we all know different thoughts lead to a different life. So first things first, meditation. I work with a lot of people, you know, at this point in time, so many people have deep-seated trauma. It's okay. I think so many of us resent our trauma. Our trauma is just what makes us interesting. Our trauma is just what gives us like rosy cheeks. I know so many of us, myself included, we can resent the things that have happened to us in our past. I teach a very specific form of Kriya, which translates into cleansing. And you have to give yourself time to cleanse the deep-seated trauma that sits within our bodies. So meditation, cleansing, I mean, these are things that I do on retreat, absolutely, and in my spiritual programs as well. And this, again, requires an unlearning, allowing yourself to purge. So that might lead to compulsive giggling or crying or belching. You have to release in some way. Once you release, so once you have this like grounded headspace, a relaxed nervous system, and I'll just put like an asterisk here. For some people, this will take time. And for others, this can happen in an instant. You just have to decide. And this is one of my most favorite spiritual practices of all, is like, you can decide right now. So anyone who's listening, you can decide right now to absolutely change your life. Meditation, Kriya, cleansing. And then once you're in this place where you know that you can connect to your breath, you can relax your nervous system, you can come back to a healthy headspace and a place of calm, you rebuild yourself. So I like to work with a lot of I am statements. This is a way to manifest and embody who you desire to be. I like to work with feeling states. What is the feeling you are calling in? Because it's not necessarily I want to hit consistent 10K months. It's the feeling attached to that. So maybe that's abundance, security, nourishment. Is it the feeling, maybe you deeply desire to be in a romantic relationship? And like, you can say, I want to be with this amazing person, this amazing man. Well, what is the feeling there? It's the feeling of being truly seen for who we are. So then you get clear on the feeling state so that you're actually calling it. Once you have a healthy headspace, once you're clear on the feeling states that you're calling in, I have a practice called the law of massive aligned action, but it's essentially just taking action on the biggest dream of all. So what is the thing that you desire more than anything? Is it to travel Italy? Is it to procreate and have children? Is it to write a book? Like, what is the thing that you desire more than anything? And taking action on that one specific thing in real time. And it doesn't take a lot of time to take action. It's a daily ritual of showing up. So I call it soul time. This is when you bare your heart to God as you understand it, the divine as you understand it. Insert whatever word you need it to be as you understand it. And soul time is a non-negotiable amount of time where you do the actual physical action. That means going on dates. That means sitting down and writing the book. That means walking 5,000 steps to achieve that level of health. It starts with always a relaxed nervous system and cleansing, and then showing up daily. And like, take the practices seriously. And on that journey, try your best to not take yourself so seriously.
Today's episode is brought to you by the John Galt Mortgage Company. Anybody who knows me well knows that I'm a fan of Ayn Rand's novels. And so I was incredibly excited when I found out my friends were starting a mortgage company named after John Galt. And I was even more excited when I found out what that mortgage company does. My friends Mitch and Tim have been working in the real estate world for years, and they realized over time that mortgages are way more expensive than they need to be. So they decided to start a new kind of mortgage, one that caps their profit on every transaction and passes the savings along to you, the buyer, in the form of a lower interest rate. I am not currently in the market for a house, but when I am, I will absolutely be working with Mitch and Tim as my lender. And if you are in the market for a house, you should absolutely check out what they're doing and get a quote for the rates that they can offer you. You can find their work at www.johngaltmortgage.com, or you can find a link to their site down in the show notes. Okay, back to the show. Have you ever heard of a book called Becoming a Writer by Dorothea Brand?
I've heard of it, but I've not read it.
It's amazing. It's kind of obscure, but it's one of the best books on writing I've ever read, and it has nothing to do with the craft of writing. It's all about what you just described, the practice of showing up.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like a week by week process of building the habit of being a writer. And the whole idea is that being a writer is an action. And so you have to do it every day. And so the book walks you through, it's like very coaching oriented. It's like giving you pep talks and structuring sort of the process of, okay, like every day you're going to sit down and you're going to write something. It's only for a few minutes. It doesn't have to be any good. And you're like just very slowly building the muscle one step at a time. This book is highly applicable for many things besides just writing, but it feels very aligned with what you're talking about.
Everything anyone desires, and our desires are written in the stars. So it's so important to not judge what you desire. It's a wink from the universe showing us exactly what we're supposed to be doing in this lifetime. And I use the word supposed to, very gently. It's your desires exist for a reason. If you keep ignoring them, they will just keep getting louder and showing up in a different way in different forms. And so often, and along with procrastination and perfectionism, so many people lack clarity. And the reason we lack clarity is because we're supposed to want very specific things, which we learn in the school system. I didn't know that entrepreneurship was an option. I didn't know I could be a spiritual psychology teacher. I didn't know that I could go out into the world and do this type of work.
Of course you didn't. We want you to be a good factory worker.
In 8th grade, we wrote papers on what we wanted to do when we grew up. I wrote mine on Oprah. And I felt like that was maybe like but I knew Oprah as a journalist. So I wanted to be a journalist. It wasn't like, it's so much more roundabout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it wasn't Oprah's an amazing entrepreneur. I want to be like that. I want to go build something, because nobody ever gave you the language to understand the world in those terms. I want to talk a little bit about the positive language thing, because that's so important both for adults and how they treat themselves, and also for children to learn how to talk to themselves and how parents are talking to them and the other adults in their world are talking to them. And you have a whole chapter in your book about this. What are some of the most important things that a parent who maybe isn't super familiar with this idea should think about or do in the way that they're both talk to their children, but also model self-talk to their children?
I'm thinking about this so much right now. Right before I came here, John and I met, so you know my husband, John, and I married like the most amazing human I can imagine for myself. I manifested him. It's chapter 6. And before I got in the car to drive here, we argued about something. I couldn't even tell you what it was. I think I couldn't even tell you what it was, but it was in front of Eden. And I'm thinking to myself, does she get this? Like, is she aware that her parents are arguing right now? Is she witnessing this? Is this going to be somewhere in her subconscious mind? I forgive myself deeply and completely, and I trust that she knows mommy and daddy love each other. This starts with the parents, and I want to go one step further and say it starts with women. An empowered mom, an empowered woman changes the whole entire world.
Yes.
It starts with the beauty industry. We need women who are not afraid of aging. This is really important.
Or their own faces.
Oh, yes. Yes. Again, like, I think people should do whatever they want. My greatest friends do all the fixings. I think people should do whatever's in alignment for them. And also, what would the world look like if women weren't afraid of aging? So even the phrase, I hate my birthday, I hate growing old, I hate my reflection when I look in the mirror, your children are hearing this. Your daughters are hearing this. This is absolutely devastating. And why? Why wouldn't you thank God every day for existing in this world right now? I am statements are life-alteringly powerful. I am was brought to the world. I mean, obviously it's in the English language. Neville Goddard is a mystic from the 1960s. You've studied Goddard.
I love Goddard.
So his book, The Law and the Promise, everyone can get it for free. Just Google it. It's like a PDF online. I am is one way that you are embodying and manifesting that which you are. So whatever you say after I am, it has to be infinitely positive, kind, powerful, uplifting. And all day we talk shit about ourselves in our own head. All day we speak poorly about ourselves. And men do this, of course, as well, but I can speak from my experience. We do this as a way to connect with each other. Like, we make fun of ourselves a little bit. So if I self-deprecate, you're going to like me. If I make this silly joke about myself and then you make a silly joke about yourself, we're on common ground. It's these little things about how we talk shit about ourselves all the time. And the body listens. It will manifest whatever you're calling in for yourself. Thankfully, the opposite is also true. So if you have beautiful, uplifting, inspired language, that's what you're going to call in for yourself. And with how manifestation works, a manifestation is law of attraction. It's calling in your deepest desires and dreams. And you can use I am statements to embody what you are calling in. So I am a nourished mother. I mean, that's really what I'm focusing on right now. I want to be this awe-inspiring, nourished mother. And the language that we just have for new moms is so sad. It's like, It's like, oh, she's fueled on coffee and dry shampoo. Like, fuck no, that stuff is toxic. I use that. And it's just like the way that we've allowed other women to talk to each other as well. That's not how I talk to my girlfriends. That's not how I talk to my clients. That's not how I talk to my students. That's for sure as fuck not how I'm going to talk to Eden. Our language is so high and holy. What we speak about ourselves is what we are calling in for ourselves. So it first starts with our own inner dialogue, our own inner conversation. We all have this consistent critic all the time in the back, running, running, running. And if you can inspire that voice to be uplifting, to be kind. And the way that I like to think about this voice is to think about it as if you are talking to your child, your best friend, your beloved, lovingly, sweetly, in a way that's super kind. So that's also why I teach active meditation, because that's also going to help rewrite the inner dialogue as well.
It's really interesting to me. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about what you just talked about with like the way that we talk about new mothers and all that comes with that, and kind of all that you're resigning yourself to by making the decision to become a mother, which, I mean, there's so many different angles here that are interesting to talk about. Everything from the sort of just broader cultural movement away from women being mothers, or the delay of motherhood and that not being even like a core part of how a woman thinks about her life for most of her early adulthood. It's much more career focused, much more socially focused. And I think a lot of that is because of how frightening being a mother sounds, how hard it sounds, and how uncertain compared to a career that you can have a lot of control over. But it's also something, I am not a mother yet, and I am very excited to be one in the coming years. And I've been doing a lot of reflecting on how I just kind of always rejected a lot of the assumptions about what a career needed to be and how unpleasant work needed to be. And by just rejecting a lot of that, I think I was freed up to think creatively about what my work could be and designing a life for myself, not even fully intentionally, just sort of finding the pieces along the way, letting it emerge, but finding a path that didn't have a lot of the baggage that I think you're taught a career has to have, but then sort of thinking through that process again with motherhood, and it feels messier. It feels almost harder to unpack. But it's very interesting to watch different, especially newer mothers in my world, and watch the way that they talk about being a mother, and then watching that pair with the actual experience that they seem to be having. It's been a very interesting thing to become aware of.
Oh, yeah. Becoming a mom and this initiation is really fucking hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I could spend days talking about this, because there's so much in this experience that I'm floored by. And I feel like I've took an unorthodox way in so many areas of my life that I'm so shocked by this experience and this initiation. And I've shared about this gently on social media, because I always believe when you're moving through something really big, you want to share authentically with your audience. But when you're in it, you need to kind of keep these things close to the heart a little bit. So there's a nice little middle ground that I play with a little bit. But when I show up on social media and I say things like, I haven't slept in a long time, I launched a book during this time, so I really had to show up and market my book, because I'm so proud of this body of work that I birthed into the world. And of course, I'm proud of my baby as well. And the comments I get from other people about, just wait until they go to school. Just wait until they go to school and then you'll sleep. School has become the babysitter.
Mm-hmm.
School has become the nanny. And it's so obvious. Of course. But I don't think we're going to pursue that type of path. So what is the other path for a tired mom I love my work. And I have such a flexible job where I can show up in a way, and I have a team that's in alignment and very cyclical. So what is the modern woman entrepreneur who has chosen to procreate? What is the algorithm that she's going to choose to educate her children? Like, what's the platform? Because I don't really want to be the one homeschooling. I don't want to be the one doing that. I think maybe John would be into that. But I think there's a lot of beautiful models out there that are being birthed into the world where you kind of get the mixture of both. And I also think a lot of people are birthing new ideas right now because we're seeing a need for this. But you are speaking to a huge point, which is feminism. The definition of feminism that I feel most comfortable with is the woman has the right to choose. I think it's so much easier for a woman to work her ass off to become partner at her law firm than it is to have children, than it is to be a mom or a stay-at-home mom. I have so much respect for stay-at-home moms. I found it to be the hardest job of my life. And that, like, there has to be a whole new realm of respect for mothers that decide to, like, become mothers anyways, like, to do that path anyways. I'm in awe of all mamas now.
It's crazy to me how much the culture puts down. She's just a stay-at-home mom. She doesn't have a career. She's not playing the same games everybody else is. No one's more important than the moms because they're the ones that are keeping the whole world running it, but they're also the ones who are nurturing and stewarding the future generation, which, what is any of this for if it's not to, keep building the world for the next generation to come up to play in? It's such an important job. And the more I live and the more I, move through my own career and think about what matters to me and what doesn't and what success metrics I care about and which ones I don't, I just keep coming back to, like, if there were no future people, most of this doesn't matter to the same extent. And so what else is more important? It's crazy how much we sort of turn up our noses at it or put it down.
Oh, yeah. It's because we live in a patriarchy, and I have a lot of theories on all of this. I believe that because men can't birth babies into the world, they try to balance in another way. And maybe they'll do an ultra marathon and they'll run 100 miles. And I have a friend, and I had this conversation with him, and he said, I want to get to that point of no return, and then I go forward anyways. I have 40 hours of natural labor. I was in that point of return for like 39 of them. That point of no return for 30, like a very long time. And these are just innate, gentle rites of passage for women.
Gentle rites of passage
for women. And these things used to be gentle. I mean, think natural birth. You were in the community. You were supported by your family. John and I mean, we are the most, for Austin, we're totally normal. But we've obviously chosen a very holistic route for our life. And that was so devastating to my family and his that really wanted us in the hospital. But thank God, and just a little bit of my birth, Eden was born facing me. Babies are supposed to come facing the tailbone. So if I was in the hospital, I likely would have had an emergency C-section. And and that's like a totally different recovery process. And I still had a pretty wicked recovery process, but I'm so grateful that we were out of the hospital. We were at a freestanding birth center, and I really had time to push her out and take time with her. And I had like 3 midwives helping me. And it was this whole thing. I like birthed with a ski rope. It was really wild. I was like holding a ski rope and like pulling myself up. It was crazy. John caught her, and umbilical cord was around her neck. She came out screaming. It was like the best thing ever. I was very out of it. But we live in a time where the balance is coming back into play, and balance coming back means women owning their worth. And that starts with a relaxed nervous system. That starts with not fearing aging and not complaining about aging and not complaining about how we look and really appreciating this part about ourselves as well. So like everything that's happening right now is actually very, very exciting. There's some like really beautiful things coming out into the world, and it's so nice to be witness to it, but also shepherding it. So even you with your podcast, you're giving unique voices a place to speak about their art. anyone who's listening, this is your permission slip to start taking action on that unique idea and to start moving forth in that as well. And if you don't know where to start and you're lacking clarity, just start with a deep breath and relaxing your nervous system. I have so much meditation content online. You can just Google me and you'll find it. And with a relaxed nervous system, balance will also come back into play.
I want to take the opportunity of having you on this show to get your take on some of the types of questions that I get from moms who are walking an unorthodox education path, at least unorthodox in the modern world, not necessarily historically at all, but more uncommon and with less support in the modern day. And some of the more common challenges that they run into. I had the pleasure of being a guest speaker on a session, like a Zoom session yesterday. It'll be a couple of weeks past by the time this episode's released. But it was a bunch of women on the call. Multiple of them are homeschooling moms. One of them had a question about how to communicate to her family and her in-laws, all of whom are, professionals inside the education system, very entrenched inside the status quo, about the very unconventional path that her high schoolers are taking. And it turns out that her daughter is like already building a business. She's a sophomore, a junior in high school, and she's, deep in the process of having an entire business off the ground and fully functional by the time she graduates from high school. And all her extended family cares about is like, why is she not studying US history? Why is she not taking geometry? What would you say to a mother who is following what's true for her children and trusting that her daughter has a vision for her life? She has this calling that she's very excited about, and the mom's going to move heaven and earth to help her pursue that and not put any unnecessary roadblocks in her way, but is getting so much pushback from her community to the extent that she, it's like, man, am I messing up? Like, am I doing something wrong? And even if I'm totally trust what I'm doing, it's very uncomfortable to have everybody that I have to interact with thinking that I'm a horrible person for doing this.
It's exhausting. Oh my God, it's so exhausting to be the black sheep. I feel that mama deeply and completely, like to be the one outside of the norm. But that's the point. It's kind of like, oh, they're going to be homeschooled. Aren't you afraid that they're going to be different? That's the point. That's the point. I always come back into, I love you deeply and completely. I love you deeply and completely. This is how we're doing it. You get to see the kids whenever you want. We're with you on the holidays. They love you. We love you. I love you deeply and completely. Let them. The more soft and gentle we are with ourselves is going to offer a response in that equal and opposite energy. Energy can never be created nor destroyed. It just exists as it is right now. And in those moments that are so activating, because I've had this a lot with my family and Jen's family, who we love and we're super close to. It's okay, because you just come back into it comes from a place of love, right? The grandparents don't want the grandkids to be left out, to feel different, to be left behind. So I think when it all comes from love, you just respond with love as well.
What about a mama who is not yet taking the leap, but she's getting ready to, and she's very afraid of all of the pushback she's going to get from her family or from her community? That fear is in some ways almost a different beast from the actual pushback that you're getting. What would you tell that mama?
I'm just thinking about how I would do this in my own life. I would probably say to my mom or my mother-in-law or my sister, who I'm close with all these people. But you start with, I'm really nervous. I'm very excited about this new opportunity where I am going to offer my child a different education. I'm nervous about this outcome, and I want your support. What do you think? Sometimes we think that our family is going to be so against us and so resentful, but they really just want to be invited in and collaborate. They want to be part of the grandchild's or the niece or nephew's education. They want to be part of their life. So instead of pushing and shoving, it's coming together and collaborating as one. And you're always safe in your truth. And if you're nervous about something, speaking about from a place of, I'm nervous about this, and always do a one-on-one conversation. Don't post this in the group chat. I'm nervous about this next step. I feel really called to it. You can say, I want your opinion on it. But if you know it's going to be a negative response, you can say, I really just need your support for this. And we're going to try this out for the next semester, the next school year, and go from there. Try to be as gentle and soft as possible with yourself and then with others.
What would you say to a parent who sees the innate talent and potential in their child and has a sense of, oh, if my child just did this, or if they just followed this path, then this whole other thing that I feel like would give my child such fulfillment would be unlocked. But my child doesn't see it the same way I do and is not excited about this path that I see for them. Coming from a place of, the parent deeply loves the child. The parent knows the child very well. The parent's very attuned to the child. They're not incorrect that the child is, this is a path that helps unlock more of their passions. But the child, for whatever reason, just isn't ready. They're not seeing it. And that's a very frustrating thing to just sit on sometimes as a parent. What would you say to that parent?
The parent is there to parent. Parents need to reclaim their power, truthfully. I think gentle parenting has its place and is so important, but there comes a time and place where the parent does know best. If it's coming, it's, as you explained it, from goodness, from attunement to the child. If the parent thinks this is what's best, the parent gets to decide. So I would just say, trust yourself.
What would you say to the parent who is pulling their kid out of the traditional system? They've seen what's happening inside of schools. They've realized they are not a fan. They don't want this for their kid. And they're thinking about deschooling their child, like deprogramming some of the stuff that they picked up along the way, some of the junk programming before they get on with, all the positive things that they want to explore with their kid. But they're grappling with how to help their child rediscover their own personality, their own curiosity, their spark, their passion that has been quashed inside of the system in the name of fitting in or not getting bullied or keeping themselves, protected and safe from other people or, not getting in trouble all of the time. How might you advise that parent?
There are 3 things I would focus on. The first is books. Read books. Read as many books as possible. Fantasy, nonfiction, memoirs, some of the greatest books ever. Give them Harry Potter. Get them into reading is the most beneficial thing. Number 2 is I would get them into nature. So let them learn from the land. Let them play with the leaves. Let them lay in the grass. Let them get bug bites. Let them get sunburns. Let them be outside and learn from nature. And then the last thing I would say is language. Let them study other languages. It's like Duolingo is a free app on your phone. There are so many different ways to learn a new language, and that's where I would have them hang out for a little bit. I grew up in very traditional schooling. I am overeducated. I feel like I did all the things. I give absolutely 0 credit to my undergraduate degree. I'm almost no credit to my undergrad degree. But there are some things that I learned in middle school and high school. There are some things I learned in 3rd grade that were so transformational. And where I grew up, there's a very large Mexican population, and you learn a lot about Spanish and immigration in my high school system, which was really beneficial. But that's also something that can be replicated just by having friends that look different than you, that connect different than you. So those are the three ways I would start: books, nature, language, and hone in on that. And travel, book a plane ticket. I think it's so funny when when parents are afraid to take their kids out of school. I find it really interesting. And maybe it's because my parents took us out of school for trips, and it came from a place of like how ridiculous and expensive it was to travel during winter and spring break. It's when flights were most expensive, it's when hotels were most expensive. So we would sometimes travel at off times. We also probably traveled during winter break, but also off times. And road trips, I think, are the most amazing way as well, because some of these practices, they might sound costly, but hopping in the car with your family and going to national parks in your country, that's an incredible way to learn history.
I know this is an enormous question, but how do you approach teaching children to meditate?
Children know how to meditate. It's adults that don't. Children know how to connect to their breath. Children know, they're very sensitive to feeling and like actual how it feels on their senses. They know what the taste in their mouth is from. They can hear the air conditioning or whatever noise is going on. So that's typically the first place that I start. So kids know how to meditate, adults don't. But a way to nurture a child is, in this moment, you can just say, what are your senses telling you? So what are you seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching? How do your clothes feel on your body? Are they tight? Are they loose? Are they scratchy? Are they cozy? Are they hot? How does your bottom feel on your chair or on the earth? What do you notice there? And that's awareness. That's mindfulness. That's coming back into your body. I always love when children can just like go hug a tree and talk about the experience of hugging a tree and breathing in and out the air with the tree. I like to teach the rainbow meditation as well, because that's a really good educational meditation practice. It's Roy G. Biv, the colors of the rainbow, and it's red at the base of the tailbone. You use the chakra system. So the chakras are an Eastern it's a Sanskrit word. It translates into wheel, and it's used in the yogic philosophy. And the chakra system, red is at the base of the tailbone, orange hips, yellow stomach, green heart, blue throat, indigo third eye center, violet top of the head. Roy G. Biv, yeah. Yes, and just breathing in and out of those places to really connect. And children can grasp that deeply and completely. They know how to breathe into the depths of their lower belly. And just like a little asterisk here, so many adults, we breathe into like our tips of our shoulders. And when you breathe just into your shoulders, you're really only using about 30, 40, maybe 50% of your lung capacity, and you're activating your flight, fright, or freeze. Like you're lighting up your amygdala, like that part of your brain that is your stressor, your flight, fright, or freeze. So you can breathe into the depths of your lower belly and just relax the nervous system with a couple deep breaths. But if you look at a child, if you look at a baby, their stomach rises and falls. Adults, our chest is rising and falling. So that's one really powerful way to redirect.
At what age do people's innate ability to meditate, does that start to drop off? Is there sort of a point that you can pinpoint, or is it just a long, slow evolution from early childhood to adulthood of forgetting?
I think it's screen time. I think screen time really dysregulates us. So there's a lot of research how when we're answering emails, we're not really breathing, or we'll hold our breath a little bit, especially if it's an activating email. So screen time is something that has kind of shifted this conversation a little bit. And that's just something that we should all be limiting, all of us.
But adults weren't good at meditating before they had screens. This is a long, deep-seated problem.
Well, if we think about a couple hundred years ago, and maybe just 100, we were synced to the rise and fall of the sun. We lit candles to see at night. We were more with our community. We had sacred ceremonies. We were connected to the land and the harvest in a different way. So we naturally had a relaxed nervous system because we were connected to our community and we were connected to nature. We were fleeing, we would get dysregulated when a beast was coming to attack us. But we've become so distanced from that tribal connection and from nature that it does become a more topical conversation.
Is the divide really that stark between pre-screens and post-screens? Or are there other societal factors at play that you think also really feed into people's disconnect from their own ability to reconnect with themselves and relax their nervous system?
Food. You've just bastardized our food. It's not real anymore. As much as you can, try to eat farm to face. Like, try to eat real food. That's the most important thing, because if we're not, so many people are malnourished. When you're malnourished, you're just not giving your body what it needs to sufficiently relax or to operate in optimum capacity. So eating real food, making sure that you're eating high quality meat. Women would need to eat significantly more protein, animal protein specifically. And yes, screens and food.
It's crazy how much dysregulation exists in both adults, but also more particularly our children, how much anxiety and depression. And have you seen the chart that shows youth suicide attempts by month of the year or week of the year? It's really quite stark. There's a big spike around the beginning of the school year and after winter break, and there's a big drop off over the summer and around the winter holidays, which feels crazy to think of as being just coincidental, that it maps onto that kind of exact calendar year after year.
That is so scary.
But so much depression, so much anxiety, so many, ADD, ADHD, just like off the charts, and so many ways in which our kids are experiencing just complete disconnect from themselves, from their grounding, from their own inner compass. And we just assume it's fine. We just assume that that's the way it needs to be.
I don't think that's the way it needs to be. I mean, I think
it's not.
Statistic. Yes, it
not the way it needs to be.
That's a really scary, very deeply scary statistic. And it's the food. I mean, these overdiagnoses, it's because people don't know how to feed themselves. The sugar, the red 40, like the synthetic food that Europe won't even trade with us with. Thank God we're in Texas and we can get high quality raw dairy. And we shake our rancher's hand. Like, we eat the most high quality animal protein that I feel like you can access in the US. It really matters because you are made up of what you eat. And I think about what I grew up on, right? Lunchables, Pop-Tarts, ramen, instant cup soup, like all of these things that I would eat. Gushers. Like, what is a gusher? Fruit roll-ups. Like, it's not real food. And I was so hyper as a kid. And of course, I'm a different person now. But when you're balanced out and you're eating high quality food and you're connecting to your breath and you're in nature and you're getting adequate sunshine and vitamin D and you have deep relationships with those who love you, you're going to live a different life. You're going to live on your highest possible timeline.
This is not related to anything that we've been talking about, but I've been dying to ask you, have you ever encountered Florence Scovel-Shinn? Okay, she was one of the early writers in the sort of, I never know exactly what to call it, but the same sort of movement as people like Napoleon Hill and Maxwell Maltz. But she was much earlier than any of them, like right around the turn of the century. And she wrote some just amazing books about positive self-talk and affirmations. And she had a book called The Magic Path of Intuition, which I remember I saw it at one point years ago, and I saved it on my Amazon to read list because I had, so many other books that I was reading at the moment. I was like, I can't order this until I finish some things. And then I remember I was going through like a really transitionary period of my career, and all of a sudden I just got this, like I could not get that book out of my hand. I was like, The Magic Path of Intuition, The Magic Path of Intuition, like it's time. And I got it, and I read it super short. I read the whole thing in like, a couple hours sitting by the wood stove in the evening. But it's just like, I feel like I have a physical copy and a digital copy. And in the digital copy, like every other line is highlighted at this point. There's just notes all over. Like there's so much in there about how to, like, it's really kind of like mental hygiene, like how to think in ways that are conducive to becoming the version of yourself that you want and not being inhibited by your own mind. It's fantastic. I think you would.
Yeah, I will check that out. That sounds really lovely.
If people enjoyed this interview, where would you send them next? Where can they find more of your work?
Well, I enjoyed this interview, so I hope everyone listening enjoyed. You can hang out with me on Instagram at Erin R. Doppelt, ErinRDoppelt. You can hang out with me online, ErinRachelDoppelt.com. My book, Nothing Can Stop You, came out recently. You can buy it everywhere books are sold. If you are interested in any of this, I dive in so deeply on Eastern ritual and Western psychology, and Nothing Can Stop You. It's truly, I'm so excited to share it with the world, and I'm receiving such wonderful responses from all of you. So definitely check that out. I also have the Wise Woman podcast, and what else is going on? My certification is about to open for early action enrollment. It is informal education, and it's really powerful. I say it's like getting your master's degree. It's equivalent to getting a master's degree. The Aligned Coaching Certification, where you become a certified meditation teacher and spiritual psychology coach, because entrepreneurship is amazing, but love of learning. So it's also for people who love to learn these practices and you want to double down in them. You can hang out with me there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Erin.
Thanks for having me.
All right, my friends, that is a wrap for today. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope that you found this valuable. Please leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. Please like the video on YouTube. And please don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you listen to make sure that you don't miss next week's episode. Thank you so much, friends. I will see you next week.